For our second reading today, we're continuing in the Gospel of Matthew. And we're kind of at a midpoint. Jesus is in the middle of his ministry. So that's where we are from a timing point of view. We're going to be reading Matthew chapter 16, verses 21 to 28. From that time on, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and undergo great suffering at the hands of the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, God forbid, Lord, this must never happen to you. But he turned and said to Peter, Get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me. For you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things. Then Jesus turns to the rest of the disciples. Then he told his disciples, If any wish to come after me, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit them if they gain the whole world but forfeit their life? Or what will it give in return for their life? For the Son of Man is to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and then he will repay everyone for what has been done. Truly I tell you, there are some standing here who will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Again, the setting for this is in the middle of Jesus' ministry, his teaching and healing and drawing crowds. Here is the question that he is facing. How does an unconventional leader like Jesus prepare a colonized people, Israel, for the death of their Messiah? In other words, how does Jesus prepare his people, including his disciples, for his own death? Just to keep things interesting, let's acknowledge that just moments before, just in the text that we read last week, as they were walking through the region of Caesarea Philippi, Peter and his disciples, at Jesus' request, pondered the question, Who do you say I am? He did not allow them just to fall back on the previous question of what others say. That was too easy. They had to answer for themselves. Peter proclaimed the answer out loud. Jesus is the Messiah, Son of the living God. Peter gets acknowledged by Jesus for getting it right. In fact, he is told this: he is the rock on which the church is to be built. This is exciting, heady times. Yes, Jesus tells them, not yet Jesus tells them at this moment, do not talk about this just yet. Sounds like a strange request. Why not talk about it? If we link to our passage for today, we may find an answer to that question. Jesus bluntly informs his disciples as what is coming next, his death and resurrection. By the way, they do not take this as good news, or maybe even accept this. They do not really yet understand. However, there they are, on their way to Jerusalem, the city under Roman control, but still the center of Israeli religion. Now, Jesus says the reality is it is necessary for him to go to Jerusalem, submit to an ordeal of suffering at the hands of religious leaders, be killed, and then on the third day raised alive. We learn later that the chief priests and elders will conspire with Caiaphas, the high priest, to slyly arrest and kill him. And Judas, a member of Jesus' inner circle, together with a sword and club carrying contingent, will join in the conspiracy. In a larger historic sense, Mitzi Smith reminds us that religion, not just Christianity, has never been free of political intrigue and violence. Even religious men and women mesmerized by power and privilege have been known to annihilate whomever in any way threatened to diminish their position or their advantages. You can easily conclude that perhaps the chief priests, the elders, and the high priest, despite being colonized subjects of the Roman Empire, had positioned themselves to take the spoils and privileges of the empire. Such as they were part of the 1%ers of their day. Perhaps they had even convinced enough of the masses of ordinary people that it is in their best interest to join the cause that favors only the rich and the powerful. After all, their history is full of this style of governance. The rich control and make sure that they stay in power, keeping the poor in their place. This happens even if, from our distant perspective, we may not see submitting to Rome as being in their best interest. So this poor person's prophet, the healer Jesus, as he has been declared the King of the Jews and the Messiah, the Anointed One, is an obvious threat to the status quo. Now, this is not new. His mere existence as an infant constituted a threat to King Herod, Rome's appointed king. Herod felt so threatened that he was willing to murder all children under 2 years old in the Bethlehem area. He wanted to assure the annihilation of the one who might someday replace him or his descendants as Rome's privileged person. We recognize that in such a system, freedom is sometimes forfeited, even by the oppressed, for the privileges and advantages of empire. Herod could rely on religious leaders, the chief priests and the scribes, to cooperate with his murderous plan. An example of religion being political and the political using religion. But Jesus' announcement of the death-dealing events about to unfold in Jerusalem points to anything but the glory of security, influence, privilege, and power of the Roman or even the puppet governors. Jesus' revelation of his fate is revolutionary. But wait a minute. What about the timing here? What happened to the amazing feature that the new church's authority to bind and loose announced by Jesus? What about the understanding the power of death and standing up to the gates of Hades? How can these things happen if God's own anointed one is to be tortured and executed? No wonder Peter takes Jesus aside to protest. He says, "God forbid it, Lord, this must never happen to you." In the world around Peter and the disciples, this appears to make no sense at all. Jesus' response is swift and to the point. "Get behind me, Satan." Perhaps unknowingly, Peter has assumed the role of adversary or Satan. In response, Jesus accuses Peter of being a stumbling block, not the cornerstone to build on of the previous passage, and accuses him of focusing on human things rather than divine things. Returning to addressing all the disciples, Jesus admonishes them, "If any want to become my followers, deny yourselves and take your cross and follow me." This is a new teaching in light of Jesus' imminent death. This is about divine things, not just human things. This is too much for Peter. Of course, his knee-jerk reaction was to say no to Jesus. Ultimately, saying no to Jesus will become a habit of the church. the church at large. Too often when Jesus says cross, we, the church, say crown. Richard Ward points out how to describe this by a scene from Fyodor Dostoevsky. That's a challenging one. His 1950s novel Brothers Karamazov. Ward says, and I'll share a quote with you here. An important part of that novel is the section, The Grand Inquisitor, a kind of parable told by Ivan, one of the brothers. It takes place at the height of the Inquisition, and Jesus has returned to earth to the Italian city of Seville. He is arrested by the leaders of the Inquisition as he, Jesus, is performing miracles and is sentenced to be burnt to death the next day. The Grand Inquisitor himself visits Jesus in his cell as he waits execution. He explains to Jesus why the church voted yes to imperial power. He says, the church no longer needs you. You were wrong to refuse the power to feed the poor, perform a miraculous leap from the temple, and grab rulership over the world. We picked up where you left off and improved on what you started. In fact, we corrected your mistake. Yes, it was necessary to use the devil's principles to do so, but we do it in the name of God. What you don't understand, says the Inquisitor, is that humanity cannot handle free will you gave them. We gave them what they really needed, security from want. Jesus doesn't respond except to listen in silence throughout the interrogation. When the Inquisitor's diatribe is finally spent, Jesus silently kisses him on his bloodless, aged lips. The Inquisitor is startled by this gesture and moved by it perhaps, but not converted. He does, however, let Jesus go with a warning: do not return again. I hope you enjoy that little interlude from the story. But it does highlight ways of the crown and ways of the cross. This parable presents a stark difference in ways they would usher in God's reign. Because the church has over time, and still does, say no to Jesus way too often, we, like the disciples, need to be mindful of the difference. We need to be mindful that in the 21st century society, cross-bearing is often perceived as for losers. The winners are those who know how to master the game of life and have accumulated the toys to prove it. Winners might even go so far as to explain that the cross represents something that Jesus provided for them, the prosperity gospel approach. Jesus told his disciples, "We are going to Jerusalem. If any wish to come after me, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me." Deny themselves. What does self-denial really mean? Matthew is pretty vague on this, quite frankly. Left as an abstraction, it becomes wide open to misinterpretation. We certainly know it does not mean a couple of things. For example, it does not mean to remain in an abusive situation and valorize it simply as one's cross to bear, to be a martyr. Neither does it mean to hide out from the life's joys and blessings and responsibilities, not enclosing oneself in self-righteousness and calling for self-sacrifice, bearing one's cross. It does not give permission to become one of life's doormats or playing the victim card. If we want a better, more positive explanation of cross-bearing, we are well advised to turn to our first reading for today, Romans 12, 9 through 21. Paul offers a long list of virtues that characterize cross-bearing in the best sense of the term. Paul starts with, let your love be genuine. Love is his base for all cross-bearing. He highlights actions and attitudes that make life meaningful. His list includes tenacious goodness and perseverance, even as evil encroaches. Patience in suffering, blessing even those who are considered enemies. Cultivating empathy and rejecting opportunities for retribution. The list continues with positive energy. Read it again and often. Finally, recognize that cross-bearing does not mean for us what it meant for Jesus. The price for us is not paid in blood. Rather, for most of us, cross-bearing means serving others with compassion and love. Picking up the cross means becoming God's ally. It often means setting aside our own agendas and personal advancement in favor of meeting the human needs of others around us. Embedded in this approach to cross-bearing is a promise. Those who have carried crosses of compassionate service to others have not only gained a meaningful life, but also caught a glimpse of God's eternal realm. Then Jesus said to his disciples, and continues to say to us, all who want to come after me must say no to themselves, take up their cross, and follow him. Amen.